Fluent Forever, how to learn any language fast and never forget it. Story time, making patterns memorable. I would rather decline 2 drinks than one Sherman adjective. So, I have chosen some examples sentences for your grammar book and broken them down into new words, new word forms and word orders. You are starting to get a feeling for grammar, but when suddenly you run face first into the dreaded declension chart, an imposing mass of data that show us the 12 forms of a Russian noun, the 16 ways to decline a German adjective, or 65 ways to decline to conjugate a French verb. Now what? You could find 65 example sentences for your grammar for your French verb. And what about the next verb? And the verb after that? The declension charts can literally fill books. I own free 550-page volumes of French, German, and Italian verb charts. If you try to memorize every conjugation of every verb one by one, you will be sitting in front of your textbook for a very long time. We need a route through this madness. First things first. There's no need to memorize it all by rote. Any 5-year-old French kid can recite most of the contents of my 501 French verbs book. And they never sat down and memorized a French verb conjugation in their lives. They are using their language machines to do that. Okay. They have taken in and understood enough input to intuit the patterns of their language perfectly. And we are going to do the same. As we have discussed, the only input that can feed our language machines is comprehensible input. We need stories and 65 ways to say to be. I am, you are, he is, I was, you were, he was. Just won't cut it. While your grammar book will usually supply you with some stories, it won't give you enough of them. In all likelihood, you will see something like this. Your book will start with a simple story like I am a student. Then it will explain that what that sentence means, which word does what, and so on. Finally, it will throw a verb declension table at your head. I am, you are, she is, we are. And move on to the next topic. You will need some way to remember all of the data in that declension table, but you only have one loose story about the student. Now what? You can create your own stories. Use that declension table to quickly generate a bunch of variations on whatever examples you find in your textbook. You can write, she's a doctor, and stick that story on a flashcard within a few seconds, in contrast with a meaningless or perhaps philosophical. She's a doctor. story is story. Okay, so it's easy to visualize, and it means something quite different than the original example from your textbook. I am a student. So you will have an easy time remembering it, and it's the sort of clear, comprehensible input to that makes language machine thrive. In the process of generating stories, you will probably make some mistakes. Perhaps we are a teacher will sleep in somewhere. In the process of generating stories, you will probably make some mistakes. Perhaps we are a teacher will sleep in somewhere, but not to worry. You will catch your mistakes within a few days. But by the end of this chapter, I will show you where to get free native speaker corrections for everything you write. And you make mistakes, and if you make mistakes, of course you will, okay, it's normal, then so much better. You will learn even more from your stories. So you can generate stories like this to learn all the forms of a single verb. You can ever create simple fragments of stories. 1 potato chip, 2 potato chips. For any adjective and noun forms you encounter. But how do you learn all of the forms for every verb, adjective, or a noun? Those 65 French verb forms are just the beginning of a story. If you are learning French, you have to learn a whole set of new verb forms for verb endings. Finir, to finish. Vendre, to sell. Not to mention one of the 200 irregular verbs. How on earth do those little illiterate French kids do this? Kids rely on patterns, and even the most irregular languages are full of patterns. English, for example, is notorious for its irregular past tense forms. Go, went, have gone, do, did, have done, have had, have had. There are hundreds of this, and they drive English students crazy. But hidden within the chaos, there are always patterns, little islands of regularity, like steal, stole, stolen, choose, chosen, choose, and speak, spoke, spoken. So when you are learning a grammatical form for the very first time, suppose you were learning English and steal, stole, stolen was your first irregular verb. Learn it with example sentences, as we did earlier. Sean stole a delicious hamburger yesterday. George has stolen pizzas in 50 states. But you don't need to make example sentences for your next irregular verb. For example, to choose, to choose, chosen, chosen. So you have already learned that pattern. You just need to somehow connect choose to the pattern you learned with steal. This is where the declension charts come in handy. While we are not very good for learning new patterns, they make it very easy to see patterns we have already learned. We are good at seeing patterns, okay? It's why we speak our native languages so well. If you have already learned to use a verb like still, you are going to have a much easier time learning all three forms of a similar verb. Okay, so you can stick those three forms or even a giant French declension chart on the back of a flashcard. Even if you are learning a French verb with 65 different declensions, you will be able to remember it. After all, you are not really remembering 65 different verb forms at once. You are just remembering that this verb follows the pattern of some other some more familiar verb. So and we'll make this process easier and more enjoyable by playing a new version of our old mnemonic mastery game. So keywords. Languages are often full of complex, hard to remember patterns. You can learn these patterns easily by embedding them into simple, understandable stories. Whenever you encounter a confusing declension chart in your grammar book, take the nearest example sentence and use it to generate the stories that cover every new form you need. You will turn these stories into illustrated flashcards, the same new word form, word order flashcards discussed earlier. And you will use those flashcards to learn your target language patterns.